Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. I'm presenting this to you today on behalf of the World Bank Group Corporate Real Estate. My name is Jagdish Rele, and I'm a senior project manager based in Washington, D.C. The novel coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic has caught us all unawares. We all know that the pandemic is once in a century crisis, and in this particular case, how should we be viewing it? As only a calamity or an opening to reevaluate? I believe that out of all crisis comes an opportunity, and hence this is a time for us to take bold action, build a more durable model of prosperity that lifts the entire country and all its citizens using sustainable solutions, sharing knowledges and experiences. We all know that construction is a large employer and a major avenue for economic growth. The World Bank Group response to the pandemic was swift. $160 billion financing capacity was made available immediately, along with emergency support operations to help over 100 developing countries. The bank group also helped countries access the critically needed medical supplies. The crisis response was in 3 stages, namely relief, restructuring, and resilient recovery, focusing on saving lives, protecting the poor and vulnerable people, ensuring sustainable business growth and job creation, strengthening policies, institutions, and investments. The IFC also deployed $8 billion in fast-track financing for sustaining businesses and preserving jobs. They also launched a $4 billion global health platform initiative. MEGA has provided $6.5 billion facility to support private sector investors and lenders. Along with dealing with its member states, the World Bank Group also had to deal with the welfare of its own staff. This paper addresses the method in which this was managed by the corporate real estate. We manage about 150 offices in the field and about 10 offices in the HQ in Washington, D.C. Like everyone else, we also had to quickly gear up to address this crisis, and with the help of our management, we were able to do so. Our offices were closed in March 2020 and resorted to home-based working. Some of these offices have been reopened in the East, but again, due to the second and the third wave of the virus, we are revisiting this status. The pandemic has had a great impact on all our lives and also in the workplace. We have dramatically shifted how to do business, and at the same time, we don't know what the future holds. The corporate real estate department worked with industry experts to develop workplace guidelines, at the same time ensuring the core values are maintained, which is a safe and healthy workplace, adopting sustainability designs, providing equitable standards, and at the same time dealing with agility in our operations and flexibility in planning. The main requirement was to adopt the best practices in the industry, design the workplace to reduce the spread of pathogens, and implement the workplaces not only for today, but also for the future. We had to deal with both the existing offices and the ongoing projects, and assist the emergency management team in reopening the offices, ensuring that proper guidelines are given for the staff welfares, and a checklist is prepared, spreadsheet in detail for this purpose. The signage is most important, as I mentioned earlier, and this was developed in 7 languages. In the case of the new an ongoing project, we developed new workplace guidelines, which was done in consultation with our health and safety experts, IT colleagues, and security colleagues. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we have developed new workplace guidelines to adjust the existing offices and ongoing projects, which would be the requirement to take care of the wellness concerns raised by this pandemic. In the case of the next stage, we are piloting some projects taking into account these workplace guidelines developed. And in the third stage, we are working with our management to see what would be the impact of the workings and see how we can adjust and adapt to the fast changing environment. It is important to lay down the guiding principles for the new workplaces. Obviously, health and safety are the most important. You need to take cognizance of the home-based work, and that technology is something which we are now using to our fullest extent. We also needed to reevaluate the comforts and assumptions and protocols that we were working with so far, embrace the new challenges, and experiment boldly towards a new outcome, which deals with flexibility in work arrangements. All of this leads to a positive effect on the carbon footprint and climate change. And finally, we decided to adopt one standard for all our offices in the field and in HQ. As I mentioned earlier, we have had extensive dialogue with the industry expert to understand their best practices and adopt the same. We have seen that increased home-based work is considered extensively, including in financial sector institutions, tech companies like Google, and even IBM, who had earlier adopted home-based working, then shifted strategy as a back to office, and now again shifted to home-based works. We feel that office attendance is required to drive by collaboration and not necessarily on performing every individual's work. We also feel that in doing so, we could adopt what we are terming as safe unassigned seating approaches, or shall I say floating seating for various staff. In consultation with other departments within the World Bank Group and extensive dialogue within the corporate real estate team members, we have adopted the following recommendations. 6 feet safe physical distancing between every staff, the layout planning with zonings, which I'll explain in greater detail as we go along, and offset the demand for increased office space by standardizing office space, which is we have 8 feet by 8 feet, could be thereabouts for other organizations, and adopting a safe unassigned seating for staff who are on home-based works for X or more days per week and who are traveling for X percentage of the work week. We decided to leverage the new project with material changes to upgrade the building systems, focusing on indoor air quality, finishes which are easy to maintain and keep clean, and touchless devices. As I mentioned earlier, we are piloting some projects with these new design guidelines and recommendations. The World Bank Group has decided to adopt the office reopening timeline in 4 tiers. Tier 4, when the office is completely closed, Tier 3 with a 10% cap on staff in the office, Tier 2, 25% cap, and Tier 1 with a 50% cap. The facilities actions for dealing with this COVID was in 3 stages. First one being reopening, second one adjust, and the third transform. In the case of the first one, reopening, it was implementation of the reopening guidelines which need to be completed prior to the reopening. In the second one, which is adjust, it comprises of changes to the existing workplaces. And the third one, transform, is design improvements to ongoing projects, which is the design guidelines that I spoke to you about earlier. For the reopening, perhaps the most important is communications to the staff, for which a video is prepared with simplified signage. For implementing of these guidelines, the facilities managers worked with the country officers, and for which we provided pre-assigned focal points. And as I mentioned earlier, a reopening checklist. Regional briefings were given to senior management at regular intervals, and there is an implementation team working with the facilities team for this purpose. In the case of the adjust sequence, this being especially important for open workstations, and we followed the usual checkerboard fashion, allowing 50% attendance and a Tier 1 workforce rotation. In case of moving to Tier 0, additional adjustments would be required, including widening the aisles, raising face-to-face panels, and in some cases even reconfiguring the furniture layout. In the case of transform, as I mentioned earlier, we developed design guidelines to address the multiple design trends which are unfolding and with an increased wellness concerns. I'll explain these in greater detail as we go forward. And of course, implementing these guidelines, we have to take into consideration the impact to schedule, cost, most important of which being the behavioral changes and requiring endorsement from the senior management for the changes. The next few slides are self-explanatory, and in the interest of time, I shall go through these quickly. Here we deal with the explanation of the social distancing protocol, communications, facility preparedness, and contracts and other services. Systems are explained in greater detail in this slide. Here are some examples of the physical distancing protocols and the signage developed by the World Bank Group. This slide shows the checkerboard fashion utilized in the conference rooms. This is the facilities checklist spreadsheet that I was talking about. Unfortunately, it is too small for you to see. These next set of slides shows the adjustments made in the open plan and other such situations. Here you can see the before and after of the add-on panels to provide safe physical distancing. This is adjustment made to the shared spaces and the cafeteria. This slide shows the responsibility matrix between the corporate real estate and the country office focal points, and also involvement of other units. The next two slides talk about the decision-making process adopted by the emergency management team. This slide shows how we tackle the various regions of the bank group. Here are the considerations laid down for transformation, which is namely home-based work, experiment boldly and radically, adapt and embrace with behavioral changes, health and safety requirement for the finishes, materials, contactless features, indoor air quality, agility and flexibility in planning, reconfiguration, cost effectiveness, and working with landlords. This slide talks about the guideline for transformation, again, principally working on social distancing, safe requirements. The next set of slides talks about the actions required to transform, namely the health and safety, space planning, dealing with conference and meeting rooms. Similarly, how to address the workspaces, cafeterias, and the ancillary functions in an office. This is again a continuation of the actions to transform. The same, please note about the cost and schedule, which is again an important factor in all cases. Now I'm going to talk about a test case to show you how we have implemented these transformation guidelines and actions in some of our projects. This is the floor plan for one of our projects. As you can see, it's been colored in three. The hot zone in pink, which is where the visitors and public are allowed. The warm zone, where only authorized visitors are allowed to enter, and which are primarily conference rooms and kept close to the entry points. And then the cold or cool zones, where only the WBG staff are allowed. This slide shows the segregation between staff and visitors. The green zone, as the warm zone, is where the authorized visitors and public conferences are there, and the staff zone is the cold zone. This slide explains the staff entry and exit discipline, starting from the awareness area, the waiting room, checking testing area, and an exit corridor in case they are not permitted to enter for any reason whatsoever and access is denied. The same thing for the visitors. Similar access protocol is followed for the visitors as well. This slide shows the staff circulation in the office, and you can see that we have drawn a 6-foot wide circle around each staff to show the safe physical distancing around them. There are one-way corridors which are 6 feet wide, and there are two-way corridors which are 12 feet wide. This is the concept of the safe unassigned seating, which I spoke about earlier, the one shaded blue. The staff, when they come in, they can go to their caddy and locker position, pick up their belongings, and pick up any seat that is available and has to be pre-booked on an app. This shows the diagram of the assigned seating, where staff are always going to be present at the offices, such as the support staff and the head of office, again with directional signage. And the offices, you can see, are all equal, approximately 8 feet square. So what is the impact of COVID-19 in this region? Firstly, the informal economy has been hard hit. The containment measures and the reverberations from the global recession has hit the many unorganized workers, self-employed, and micro enterprises which have experienced a large drop in earnings. The poor have also suffered severely, and the informal workers in the middle of the income group distribution have all seen the greatest drop in earnings. Many of them are not covered by social insurance. The crisis actually lays bare the complicated structural problems in the informal sectors, which needed to be addressed to prevent the breakdown of social cohesion. Construction industry, we know, has a complex equation with unorganized workers. Today, in all governments, there's a tension between containing the disease, providing relief, and promoting recovery and growth for tomorrow. So what can we do? We need to reflect on the key takeaways. We need to share the lessons learned and foster sustainable change. We need to establish strong partnerships across all sectors and increase support to those who are exposed to these fragilities, the low and the middle income strata, and boost resilience. Again, construction, we know, is a huge driver to enable all of these. Here I have listed the construction positives, which is education reform, vocational training, adopting sustainability practices, using certified sustainable materials, support a resilient recovery, maintain good housekeeping and efficient waste management, and opportunity for cross-pollination. And with all of this, leapfrog into the next era. The World Bank Group has a large real estate portfolio, as I mentioned, in the headquarters and in the field. To deal with this, we have prepared the new design guidelines. And we feel that these guidelines can be emulated for offices worldwide with suitable modifications and also some other modifications for residential and commercial complexes as well. In the following slides, I am describing these design requirements. First, the corporate role requirements have been listed. Again, the safe and healthy workplace, sustainability principle, reevaluate the comforts, assumptions, and protocols, deal with flexibility in planning, flexible work arrangement, using technology, having a positive effect on the collective carbon footprint and climate change, and respond not only to the crisis today, but steps towards the future. The COVID mitigation measures, as I said, communication is the key, health and safety is important, zoning, hot, warm, cold, I've already described earlier. The space planning requirements are mentioned on this slide. Again, this is a repeat of what I mentioned earlier. These are the guidelines for workplaces and designing of the individual spaces, including the safe unassigned spaces. Here we talk about the individual spaces starting from the entrance lobby, the conference meeting room, ancillary spaces, and the storage facilities. This is for restrooms. Here we talk about the finishes for the floors, as I mentioned, which are easy to keep clean, the walling and the ceiling, including sound attenuation products. Signage we spoke about earlier, and the signage package developed by the World Bank Group. Indoor air quality, we know, is perhaps the most important, and this needs to be dealt with quite carefully with proper mitigation measures. Facilities management is perhaps the most important to ensure proper upkeep of any facility, and therefore due importance needs to be given to this requirement. Thank you.